The storm had teeth that night. Wind howled across Timberwolf Ridge as if the mountains themselves were being torn apart, and snow fell so heavy it erased the line between sky and earth. Deputy Caleb Hunter stood alone in his cabin, a weathered shelter tucked deep into the Montana woods. The thermometer nailed to the window had bottomed out at 55 degrees below zero, though the air felt sharper still, like invisible knives pressing against the logs and glass. He poured himself coffee from a dented steel pot, steam rising briefly before vanishing into the cold drafts that slipped beneath the doorframe. He had grown used to nights like these, nights where the silence between gusts was so absolute it pressed on his chest, nights when the only sound inside was the groan of wood in protest against the storm. For 3 years since his wife's death, Caleb had carried out this ritual: patrol, return to the cabin, strip off the sheriff's deputy jacket, sit in solitude with a cup of coffee and a silence so complete it swallowed every thought. But tonight, something broke the pattern. At first, it was faint, so faint he thought it was the wood stove popping. Then it came again, deliberate, scratching against the door. Not the branch of a tree blown loose, not the shriek of ice peeling from the roof. This was softer, rhythmic, almost like claws. Caleb froze, mug half raised. His training pressed into his bones after years in the Marines and later law enforcement. Listen for the anomaly, the small sound before danger reveals itself. He set the cup down slowly, his storm gray eyes narrowing as he reached for the pistol holstered near the entryway. Another scratch. Then, clear through the roar of wind, a whimper. Caleb's heart stuttered. That sound did not belong to the storm. It carried weight, need, desperation. He unlatched the lock, bracing himself against the cold as he cracked the heavy door. Snow barreled inside, blinding for a breath, burning his cheeks. Through the swirling white, a shape materialized on the porch. A German shepherd, fur crusted with ice, ribs faintly visible beneath her coat. Her amber eyes blazed not with fear, but with determination. Clenched carefully in her jaws hung a tiny body, a puppy limp and unmoving, its muzzle dusted white with frost. For a moment, man and dog stared across the threshold, snow screaming around them. Caleb's mind flashed back to a warning his colleague Mark had muttered at the substation earlier that week. "Don't waste kindness on strays, Hunter. Out here, open your door once and you'll never close it again." The puppy's chest gave a shallow shiver. Then it stilled. That decided it. Caleb holstered his weapon, bent his tall frame, and reached forward. His voice cracked with a gentleness he hadn't used in years. "Easy, girl. I've got him." The shepherd lowered the pup onto the porch boards, nudging it forward with her muzzle before locking her gaze back on Caleb. There was no wild panic in her eyes. It was steady, raw and appeal measured as if she had studied him from afar and chosen him as the last chance left. Caleb scooped the pup into his arms. It was Firelight, fur wet and brittle, body frighteningly cold. He felt a faint flutter of heartbeat against his chest, so fragile it reminded him of a moth's wing trapped against glass. "Hang on," he muttered, slamming the door shut against the storm. Inside, the cabin glowed orange from the stove. Caleb knelt on the braided rug, laying the pup onto his late wife's wool blanket. His hands rubbed briskly along its ribs, coaxing blood to move. For long seconds, nothing happened, just limp stillness, his breath quickening in frustration. Then, the pup twitched. A weak whimper escaped, ribs lifting with shallow breaths. Relief tore through Caleb's chest like fire thawing ice. Behind him came another scratch at the door, this time not frantic, not desperate, just patient. Caleb hesitated, glancing at the pup, then at the door. The echo of Mark's warning rang again. Don't bring strays inside. But rules were hollow when weighed against a life. He pulled the door open wide. Snow shot across the floor, scattering embers. The mother shepherd stepped forward carefully, her head low, her eyes fixed on him. She padded straight to the pup, curled her body around it, ribs forming a wall of warmth. She licked its muzzle and tucked it closer against her chest, her tail wrapping tight like a shield. Caleb sat back on his heels, breath still ragged. He watched the scene, firelight flickering across the dog's icy fur, the tiny chest of the pup rising a little steadier now. Something shifted inside him, a crack in the armor he had built around solitude. "You made the right call coming here," he whispered without realizing. The cabin, once a bunker of silence, now breathed with new life. Caleb rose slowly, careful not to startle her. He rummaged through a cupboard, pulling out smoked venison strips from a mason jar, and filled a steel bowl with warm water from the kettle. Sliding them across the floor, he watched the shepherd weigh the risk. Hunger won. She stepped forward, chewing with precise, efficient bites. Caleb leaned against the chair, memories gnawing at him. Afghanistan, a dusty road, the bark of a German shepherd alerting his unit to a buried IED, a dog named Rex who saved them, and a young handler who didn't survive the firefight after. Dogs carried burdens in silence. So did men. The mother lowered her head for another piece of venison. The firelight caught a faint mark beneath her neck, letters and numbers tattooed into skin. Caleb crouched closer, recognition hammering his chest. A K9 identifier. This was no stray. This was a trained partner once, discarded or stolen, now carrying her pup through a storm. His throat tightened. He reached out a hand instinctively, stopping inches from her fur. The shepherd stiffened, eyes narrowing, a low rumble rising in her chest. Caleb pulled back, palms open. "Easy, I just wanted to see." She curled tighter around the pup, ears twitching at the storm's howl against the shutters. Caleb sat back, pressing fingers into his brow. He had made himself a rule after the accident that killed his wife. No attachments, no openings. And yet, here he was, a pup wrapped in her blanket, a mother marked by service, both staring at him as if testing whether he would keep the door shut in his heart. The fire cracked. Sparks spiraled up the stovepipe. Caleb poured another cup of coffee, though his hands shook enough to spill it onto the floorboards. He watched the shepherd lick her pup, her tail curling around them both. He thought he heard the faintest sigh from the puppy as its chest rose with steadier rhythm. The silence pressed heavy again, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of something fragile being born. Caleb leaned back against the wall, exhaustion seeping into him. His eyes drifted toward the window, rimmed with frost. Outside, snow twisted endlessly, a world buried in white. Yet, as he stared, he thought just for a second he saw movement beyond the tree line, a shadow where no shadow should be, lingering too long before melting back into the storm. He blinked hard, unsure if it was memory, exhaustion, or something else. But Liberty, though he hadn't given her the name yet, lifted her head at the same instant, amber eyes fixed on the same stretch of darkness. Her ears twitched. A low growl pulsed from her chest. Caleb's pulse quickened. Was something or someone out there watching his cabin in the storm? Morning crept slowly into the mountains, pale light pressing through a sky still thick with storm clouds. The snow had not stopped falling, it simply shifted from a furious barrage to a steady drift, as if the ridge itself sighed under the weight. Inside Caleb Hunter's cabin, warmth clung stubbornly around the wood stove. The fire had burned all night, and yet the air still held a sharp edge. Caleb stirred awake in the chair by the door. His neck ached from sleeping upright, his hand still resting unconsciously near the rifle he had leaned against the wall. The first thing he heard was breathing soft, steady, fragile. He blinked, adjusting to the dim light, and saw the German shepherd curled on the rug, her body forming a fortress around her pup. Both were alive. Both were here. For a moment, Caleb thought it had been a dream. The storm, the scratching at the door, the decision that cracked open 3 years of solitude. But the smell of damp fur and smoke, the faint twitch of the pup's tiny legs, the amber eyes that flicked open and locked onto him, the instant he shifted, all of it was real. He exhaled, slow, steady. "Guess we made it through the night," he murmured. The shepherd did not move. She kept her head lowered, ears angled toward him, gaze unblinking. Every muscle along her frame was taut, yet not hostile, simply watchful. Caleb recognized that posture. It was the stance of a soldier off duty, but never off guard. He eased himself from the chair, joints stiff, and moved toward the stove. His boots creaked on the wood, drawing a faint growl from her throat. He raised a hand in calm. "Easy, girl, not looking to take him from you." He grabbed the kettle, poured warm water into a steel bowl, then sliced a few strips of smoked venison from the jar. He set both down on the floor a few feet from where she lay. The shepherd's nose twitched. Hunger rippled through her eyes, but she didn't budge at first. She looked to the pup, nudged him closer with her muzzle, then finally inched forward. Step by cautious step, she closed the distance. Her ribs showed with every breath, sharp beneath the matted coat, but she moved with precision, efficient, deliberate. She drank, then chewed, each bite economical, as if she had learned never to waste energy. Caleb crouched nearby, studying her in the shifting firelight. It was then he noticed it again, just below her neck, hidden where fur thinned. Letters and numbers inked into the skin. Not scars. Not random. Tattooed. His chest tightened. A K9 identifier. His breath caught, memories colliding. Afghanistan, heat radiating off asphalt, the choking dust. A shepherd named Rex barking furiously, stopping them just steps before an IED detonated. The young corporal handler who didn't survive the firefight days later. Caleb swallowed hard. Dogs carried burdens in silence, and so did the men who relied on them. He leaned closer to see the mark clearly. The shepherd's ears snapped back, and in an instant her body stiffened. A low rumble built in her chest. Caleb froze, hand hovering mid-air. Her amber eyes narrowed, warning sharp as steel. He pulled back, palms open. "All right, my mistake." The growl ebbed, though her gaze never softened. She lowered herself protectively over the pup, curling tighter. Caleb sat back against the chair, rubbing his face. So she wasn't just a survivor of the wilderness. She had once belonged to someone. She had trained, served, obeyed commands, carried out missions, and now she was here, with a pup clinging to life, on his cabin floor. The thought unsettled him more than he expected. He had drawn a hard line after the accident that killed his wife. No attachments, no openings. He had survived 3 winters in that cabin under that rule. Yet here, in less than a night, a mother and her pup had torn it apart. He reached for his coffee, found the mug empty, and muttered under his breath, "So what am I supposed to do with you now?" The shepherd blinked slowly, as if considering the question. Then she nudged the pup closer and settled her chin across her paws. Eyes still locked on him. Hours passed in quiet rhythm. Caleb tending the fire, the dog tending her pup, the storm breathing around the cabin. Once, the puppy let out a weak squeak, trying to wriggle against the blanket. Caleb crouched, careful, and slid the wool tighter around its tiny body. The mother tensed, but did not interfere. Instead, she followed his hand with her eyes, then unexpectedly pressed her nose against the back of his wrist. A fleeting touch, gone in a blink, but unmistakable. Trust. Fragile. Conditional. But trust. Caleb's chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. He let out a rusty laugh, surprising even himself. The sound startled the shepherd. She raised her head, ears twitching, before relaxing again when she realized he wasn't a threat. He leaned closer. "You need a name." His gaze drifted to the fire, the snow piling against the window, the way she had carried her pup through a storm that could freeze a man solid. She had chosen to fight, to endure. "Liberty," he whispered finally. "Yeah, liberty suits you." The words seemed to linger in the air. The shepherd did not react beyond a slow blink, but for Caleb, it sealed something, a recognition, a vow. Evening fell. The storm thickened again, snow rattling against the shutters. Caleb fed another log to the fire and sat cross-legged on the rug, closer this time. Liberty watched but did not bristle. The pup breathed steadily, each rise and fall of its chest stronger than the night before. Caleb let himself believe just for a moment that maybe they'd both survive. Then it happened. Liberty's head snapped toward the window. Her ears pricked sharp, muscles coiling tight. A sound reached Caleb's ears too faint, barely there. Not the moan of wind, not the crack of ice. Something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching in the snow outside. Caleb froze, every nerve alive. Liberty's growl rolled low, vibrating through the floor. The cabin that had felt safe only moments ago now seemed paper-thin. Caleb rose silently, hand closing around the rifle by the door. His heart hammered, the old soldier's instincts roaring awake. He moved to the frosted window, peeled back the curtain an inch. Through the swirl of white, a shadow lingered at the tree line, tall, motionless, watching. Too far to see a face, but close enough that Caleb knew it wasn't chance. He held his breath. When he blinked, the figure was gone, melted back into the storm. Liberty remained tense, eyes fixed on the same patch of darkness, growl unbroken. Caleb tightened his grip on the rifle. Someone was out there, and they weren't lost. He turned from the window, the weight of realization heavy in his chest. Liberty and Scout were more than strays who stumbled into his cabin. Someone else knew it, someone else wanted them. And in the silence that followed, Caleb asked himself the question he didn't want answered. Who was watching his cabin in the storm? The storm slackened by dawn, leaving Timberwolf Ridge buried under a heavy quilt of white. Icicles hung like glass knives from the eaves of Caleb Hunter's cabin. The world outside seemed muted, every sound swallowed by snow. For a while, silence reigned a brittle calm after the roar of the night. Inside, the stove glowed with stubborn embers. Caleb crouched on the rug, watching Liberty nurse her pup. Scout's breathing had grown steadier, the shallow rasp of the first night replaced by fragile but regular rhythm. Each twitch of his tiny paws sent relief rippling through Caleb's chest. He had not realized until now how much of himself had been holding its breath alongside the puppy. He rose, stiff from the night, poured coffee from the steel pot, and stepped to the frosted window. Beyond the glass, light bled into the valley thin, hesitant. For the first time in days, he could make out the ridgeline, Snow weighed down the pines, their branches bowed like tired soldiers. The storm was not done, but it had retreated far enough to reveal a world remade. A movement on the ridge path caught his eye. A figure trudging slowly through the drifts, bundled against the cold. Caleb's hand went instinctively to the rifle near the door, his breath hitching. The memory of the shadow at the tree line still burned fresh. He narrowed his eyes, tracking the gait steady, measured, familiar. Then his pulse eased. It was Martha Collins. She was wrapped in her patched wool coat, scarf wound high across her lined face, boots caked in snow. A cloth-covered basket swung from one hand, and in the other she carried a small glass bottle that caught the morning light. Her frame was lean but strong, shaped by decades of ranch work. She walked with the quiet determination of someone who had weathered more winters than most men could endure. Caleb opened the door before she reached the porch. "Morning, Martha," he called, voice rough with fatigue. "Morning, Caleb," she answered, breath puffing in clouds. She lifted the basket. "Storm's got everyone penned in. Thought I'd bring bread. And this," she held up the bottle, "a little goat's milk. Always keep some on hand for weak lambs. Figured you might need it." Her eyes flicked past him as she stepped inside, snow trailing from her boots. They landed on the shepherd curled near the fire, her pup nestled against her chest. Martha froze mid-step, her gaze softening in surprise. "Well, I'll be," she whispered. "Didn't expect company like that." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, uneasy. "Showed up on my porch 2 nights ago. Pup was barely breathing." Martha set the basket on the table, crouched near the rug with practiced slowness, as if approaching a skittish colt. "Poor thing," she murmured. "Hanging by a thread." Liberty lifted her head, ears pricked, eyes sharp. The pup shifted beneath the blanket, mewling faintly. Caleb watched, tense, but Martha kept her movements small and respectful. She unwrapped the bottle from its cloth and handed it to him. "Warm it by the stove, a few drops at a time. Goat's milk works wonders when nothing else will." Caleb obeyed, heating the bottle with care. He found an old medicine dropper, rinsed it, then knelt beside Scout. Liberty's muscles tensed, but she didn't interfere. Caleb squeezed a few drops into the pup's mouth. At first, nothing. Then Scout's tongue flicked, weak but determined. He swallowed, then swallowed again. Caleb exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The pup whimpered softly, then nestled tighter against his mother. His breathing, faint but stronger, filled the cabin like a small miracle. Martha's lined face softened into a smile. "See? Doesn't take much, just a bit of care and something warm in the belly. I've pulled plenty of lambs back that way." She reached out, brushing her fingers against the edge of the blanket, though she didn't touch the pup itself. Her eyes shifted to Liberty. "She's a fine dog, carries herself like she's known people before. You don't get that steady look in the eyes from the wild alone." Caleb thought of the tattoo beneath Liberty's fur, the way she had positioned herself between him and the door, tactical, deliberate. He didn't mention it yet, but Martha's words only confirmed what he already suspected. This was no ordinary stray. Liberty lowered her head, licking Scout's muzzle, then lifted her gaze back to Caleb. The firelight caught in her amber eyes, steady, searching. He felt the weight of her look as if she were measuring him, deciding if he was worthy of the fragile trust she had begun to give. Martha stood, brushing snow from her sleeves. "You're a good man for letting them in, Caleb. Most folks would have shut the door." He gave a dry laugh. "Most folks probably would have been smarter." She placed a firm hand on his arm, stronger than her thin frame suggested. "Sometimes it isn't about what's smart. Sometimes it's about what's right. The Lord has a way of putting things in our path for a reason. You may not have planned on them, but maybe you were meant to." Her words sank deep, unsettling and comforting all at once. Caleb didn't reply, but he felt the knot in his chest loosen. They shared coffee at the table for a few quiet minutes. The cabin hummed with warmth, Scout breathing steady by the fire. For the first time in years, Caleb felt his solitude shift, replaced by the weight and the gift of presence. Martha bundled her scarf back around her face, lifting the empty basket. "Keep giving the little one milk every few hours. She'll pull through. And feed the mother proper. She's running herself ragged to keep that pup alive." Caleb nodded, grateful. She paused at the door, her gaze lingering on Liberty. "Take care of them, Caleb, and maybe let them take care of you too." Then she stepped out into the snow, her tracks already blurring in the wind. Caleb closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. Her words echoed in his mind. He turned back to the fire, where Liberty curled around Scout, both breathing evenly now. The bottle of goat's milk glinted on the table, a reminder that sometimes the smallest kindness could mean the difference between life and death. But the peace didn't last long. Late that afternoon, Caleb shrugged into his patrol jacket, strapped his belt tight. He told himself he was just checking the perimeter, but his gut told him something more. The memory of the shadow at the tree line had not left him. The woods were silent under the snow, but silence had never fooled him before. Deer trails cut across drifts, fox prints scattered near the clearings. Yet near the ridge, he found something that didn't fit, footprints larger than his own, fresh, pressed deep. The stride was purposeful, heavy, as if carrying weight. Nearby, half buried under powder, lay a metal snare, teeth glinting faintly in the pale light. Caleb's jaw tightened. Snares were legal with permits, but not this close to residential land, and never during a storm. Someone reckless or deliberate was hunting near his cabin. He marked the spot in his notebook, brushed snow back over the snare, and retraced his steps. All the while the feeling clung to him, eyes just beyond sight, watching. When he returned, dusk had settled. The cabin glowed with firelight. Liberty and Scout curled together near the stove. Yet Liberty stirred the moment he entered, ears flicking, head lifting. She turned toward the window, muscles rigid, and a low growl rumbled from her chest. Caleb stilled, following her gaze. Outside, the snow thickened, shadows stretching long across the clearing. He laid a hand on Liberty's shoulder, his own pulse hammering. "You sense it too," he whispered. Her growl deepened, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the glass. And then it came 3 deliberate knocks against the door. Who was knocking in the middle of a blizzard night, and what did they want with his cabin? The knocks came again, 3, deliberate, echoing through the cabin like a pulse. Not the howl of the storm, not the scrape of branches, human. Caleb's body coiled tight, instincts firing alive. Liberty was already on her feet, teeth bared, body low over Scout. Her growl rattled the walls harder than the wind outside. Caleb crossed the room in silence, his hand steady on the rifle. He pressed his shoulder against the door, every nerve screaming. "Who's there?" he called, voice flat, controlled. The answer came rough, carried on breath raw from cold. "Storm caught me out. Name's Raymond. Thought I might come in, warm myself a spell." The words were simple, almost casual, but the tone, the pause between syllables, carried something else. Calculation. Caleb unlatched the door an inch, rifle angled. Snow swirled in, blinding for a heartbeat, then resolved into a man standing hunched against the night. Tall but gaunt, his patched parka leaking snow at the seams, scar jagged across his chin, puckered white against windburned skin. Eyes gray, sharp, cutting past Caleb into the cabin the instant the door cracked. "Evening," the man rasped, his lips curled faintly. "Didn't expect company." Behind Caleb, Liberty erupted in a furious snarl. She placed herself squarely between the stranger and her pup, her amber eyes locked on him, unwavering. The man's gaze lingered on her too long, something speculative in it. Fine-looking shepherd, rare to see one like that just wandering free. Caleb stepped into his line of sight, rifle angled but not raised. "Coffee's hot," he said evenly, voice hiding the current beneath. "You can have a cup before you head on." The stranger tilted his head, eyes flicking once more to Liberty, then shrugged. He stepped inside. Snow spilled across the floor as Caleb shut the door behind him. The cabin shrank under his presence. He moved with wiry grace, gloves mismatched, boots worn thin. A heavy canvas pack slung across his back bulged at odd angles. He lowered himself into the chair near the table, fingers long and restless around the mug Caleb handed him. They spoke little. He muttered about hunting trails iced over, about supplies running low. Words practiced, offered like a shield. Caleb answered politely but without warmth. His attention split between the man's eyes and Liberty's growl that hadn't eased since he crossed the threshold. The pup whimpered softly, muffled against his mother's chest. Liberty lowered her head over him, but her gaze never left the stranger. Minutes stretched long, filled only by the crack of fire and the faint hiss of snow against the windows. Finally, the man drained his cup, rose, tugged his gloves back on. "Obliged," he said, voice flat. His gaze swept the room once more, lingering too long on the rug where Liberty curled. "Storm's not done yet. Maybe I'll see you again." Then he was gone, swallowed by the white. Caleb shut the door hard, his breath misting. Liberty remained rigid, hackles high, her eyes locked on the empty space where the man had stood. He crouched beside her, voice low. "Yeah, I didn't like him either." The next morning brought no relief. The storm had eased, but the silence outside was heavier than before, pressing against the windows like a held breath. Caleb couldn't shake the stranger's voice, the way his eyes had clung to Liberty. He moved through the cabin with restless energy, feeding the fire, checking his rifle, glancing toward the ridge trail. By noon, Martha appeared again, bundled in her coat, a basket tucked under her arm. She stepped inside, shaking snow from her scarf, and froze at the sight of Caleb's tight jaw. "You had a visitor," she said, more statement than question. Caleb nodded once, recounting the knock, the scarred face, the way the man's gaze lingered too long on Liberty. Martha's face darkened. "There's been talk in town," she said quietly. "Rumors of men moving through the backwoods, not for deer, for dogs, not mutt's trained stock. There's money in it, cruel as it is. Military, security, overseas buyers." Caleb's gut clenched. He looked at Liberty, her head lifting, ears forward as if she understood every word. "You be careful," Martha warned. "If that man comes back, it won't be for coffee." Her words hung in the cabin long after she left. That night, Caleb sat in the chair by the door, rifle laid across his knees. Liberty dozed lightly near the fire, but every twitch of her ears betrayed her vigilance. Scout whimpered in his sleep, nuzzling against her warmth. Caleb's thoughts circled back to the tattoo beneath Liberty's fur. He had spent years alongside men who trusted their lives to shepherds just like her. He knew the posture, the discipline, the way she measured every movement in the room. She was no stray. She was a partner once, and someone out there knew it too. The hours crawled past midnight. Snow drifted down lazily now, the storm's rage replaced by an eerie calm. Caleb's eyelids grew heavy, but his grip on the rifle never loosened. Then it came. A faint scrape on the porch. Not wind, not snow. Intentional. Liberty snapped awake, a bark tearing from her chest. She seized Scout by the scruff, retreating toward the darkest corner, teeth flashing. Caleb's stomach dropped. Only one man would be bold enough to return like this. The latch rattled. Then a shoulder slammed against the door. "Open up, Hunter!" The voice rasped through the night, edged with anger. "Raymond." Caleb shoved his weight against the door just as it buckled under the assault. His pulse hammered, every instinct screaming. Liberty's bark cracked the air like gunfire. Her body coiled, ready. Caleb braced harder, rifle in hand, Liberty's growl vibrating at his side. The cabin walls shook under the storm, and the stranger's weight alike. Scout whimpered from the shadows, and in the chaos, one thought burned in Caleb's mind. What exactly was Raymond after, and how far was he willing to go to get it? The door shuttered again, harder this time. Snow rattled loose from the eaves, falling in sheets past the window. Caleb Hunter leaned all his weight into the wooden frame, teeth gritted, rifle pressed close. On the other side, Raymond's voice rasped, louder, edged with fury. "Don't make this harder, Hunter. That dog belongs to me." Liberty snarled from the corner, her body curved over Scout like a shield. Her amber eyes burned with the kind of fire Caleb had seen in combat, unrelenting, unbroken. Each bark rattled the cabin walls, vibrating in Caleb's chest. The door buckled. Caleb knew it wouldn't hold. In one swift motion, he unlatched the lock and yanked it open. Raymond stumbled forward, unprepared, his gaunt frame collapsing into the room with a spray of snow. His eyes widened at the sudden reversal. Caleb's rifle was already raised, muzzle inches from his chest. "Drop whatever you're carrying," Caleb growled. Raymond's cracked lips curled into a sneer. His gloved hand tightened around something coiled at his side. A rope. Not for climbing, not for supplies. For binding. "You don't understand," he hissed. "She's worth more than you'll ever make in this backwater town. Military stock. She was stolen from me." "Stolen?" Caleb's voice cut sharp. "She's not property. She's a survivor. And she's not going anywhere with you." Raymond lunged. The rifle clattered as Caleb deflected the swing of the rope. They collided hard, the table tipping sideways, mugs shattering on the floor. The cabin erupted in chaos, fists, boots, snarls. Raymond fought like a man cornered, driven by something rawer than greed, desperation. Caleb matched him blow for blow, years of training buried deep in his bones, snapping awake. But Raymond was wiry, fast, his eyes wild with hunger and something darker. He slammed Caleb against the wall, hand scrabbling toward the rifle. Then Liberty launched. Her jaws clamped around Raymond's wrist, teeth sinking deep. His scream tore through the storm outside, blood spattering the floorboards. He thrashed, trying to shake her off, but she held with the unyielding grip of a soldier's dog. Caleb seized the opening, wrenching Raymond's arm behind his back. He slammed him to the floor, pinning him hard. Liberty still latched on like iron. Raymond writhed, snarling curses, but the fight bled out of him as Caleb twisted until bone and tendon screamed. "Enough!" Caleb barked, chest heaving. The rope skittered across the floor, useless now. Raymond's breath came ragged, broken. Blood seeped through his torn glove, dripping onto the snow, blown in through the door. For a moment, only the sound of the storm filled the cabin. Caleb knelt, pressing his knee into Raymond's back, rifle angled within reach. Liberty released her grip at last, her muzzle stained dark, her chest heaving. She returned instantly to Scout, pressing her nose against the pup as if to check him for harm. Raymond coughed, voice guttural. "You think this ends with me? You've got no idea what you've stepped into." Caleb's jaw clenched. He yanked the rope from the floor, binding Raymond's wrists with practiced knots. The man hissed but couldn't fight. The radio on the table crackled suddenly, cutting through the storm's howl. A familiar voice, Sheriff Daniels, calm, steady. "Hunter, you there?" Got a call from Collins down the ridge. She heard dogs barking fit to wake the dead. Said it didn't sound right. Caleb pressed the receiver, voice clipped. She was right. "I've got a man in custody. Raymond Cole. Tried to force his way in. He's after the shepherd." Silence hummed for a moment, then Daniels replied, weight in his tone. "Hold tight. I'm on my way." Headlights carved through the storm minutes later, sweeping across the clearing. The door burst open to reveal Daniels, thick-set and weathered, his parka dusted white, rifle slung across his shoulder. Deputy Hernandez followed, younger, sharper, his eyes wide at the scene. The wrecked table, blood-spattered floor, Liberty bristling in the corner. Caleb rose slowly, keeping Raymond pinned. Caught him trying to take her. He admitted she's part of something bigger. Daniels bent, hauling Raymond upright with practiced force. The man spat blood into the snow, eyes flashing venom. "You can drag me in," Raymond rasped, "but there will be more coming. You can't keep her safe forever." Daniels shoved him toward the door. "We'll see about that." The storm swallowed their figures as Hernandez followed, his hand firm on Raymond's shoulder. Caleb closed the door, leaning against it. His chest still heaved with the remnants of the fight, his hands raw from rope burns and fists. He turned toward the fire. Liberty was there, pressed close to Scout, her body trembling from adrenaline. She lifted her head when his eyes met hers. For the first time, she didn't look like a creature caught between fear and fury. She looked like a soldier, acknowledging another. Caleb crouched, running a hand gently along her head. She tensed for a second, then leaned into the touch, just slightly. "You're safe now," he murmured. Scout squeaked, nosing closer to her chest. Caleb felt something unfamiliar swell in him, lighter than relief, heavier than gratitude. Purpose. But as the fire crackled, his gaze shifted to the window. The storm was easing, but the words Raymond had spat still hung in the air. "There'll be more coming." Caleb's hand tightened on Liberty's fur. He had won the night, but what if this was only the beginning? The storm thinned by morning, leaving the forest under a brittle silence. Snow stacked high along the porch rails, glittering like glass shards in the weak sunlight. Caleb Hunter stepped outside, breath clouding in the cold, eyes scanning the ridge. No sign of Raymond, no movement along the tree line, only the vast stillness of Montana buried in white. But silence had never meant safety. He turned back into the cabin, bolting the door behind him. Liberty lifted her head from the rug, amber eyes following his every motion. Scout squeaked in his sleep, paws twitching against the wool blanket. For a fleeting moment, the cabin felt almost normal, like a home. But Raymond's words gnawed at him. "There'll be more coming." Caleb couldn't ignore it. If Liberty wasn't just a stray, if she truly carried the tattoo he thought he saw, then someone had put her through training. Someone had lost her or abandoned her. And if Raymond was right, someone wanted her back. He pulled his old oak desk into the light and dug through the bottom drawer. Files, reports, yellowed notes from his years in uniform. The smell of ink and dust clung to the paper. He sifted until his fingers landed on a folder stamped in fading black. K9 Unit. Decommissioned reports. The words blurred for a moment as memories pressed in. Afghanistan heat. A shepherd named Rex barking furiously, saving lives seconds before a buried IED detonated. The handler's scream in the firefight that followed. Caleb shook his head, forcing the memory back, and flipped open the file. Grainy photographs, typed lines, reports of German shepherds gone missing from a training facility outside Denver 6 months ago. Each case filed quietly, almost buried in bureaucratic jargon. Presumed lost during transfer. Escaped, not recovered. Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew that wording. It meant someone didn't want questions asked. One description made him sit straighter. Female, sable and black coat, scar on left ear from a training incident. His eyes lifted to Liberty. She stirred, licking Scout's head, the scar faint but undeniable beneath her fur. Caleb exhaled slowly, the weight of truth pressing down. "So that's who you are," he whispered. "You were a soldier once." Liberty's gaze met his, steady, unblinking. For a heartbeat, it felt less like she was being studied and more like she was studying him. By afternoon, the knock at the door startled him. Sharp, quick, familiar. Caleb reached for his rifle before pulling it open. Martha stood there, cheeks pink from the cold, scarf pulled tight under her chin. In her hands, another basket. "Brought stew," she said simply, stepping inside without waiting. Her eyes found Liberty instantly. The shepherd didn't snarl this time, her muscles remained tense, but something in Martha's presence seemed to ease her. "You've been busy," Martha murmured, noting the scattered files on the desk. Caleb explained in clipped tones, "The tattoo, the Denver reports," Raymond's words. Martha listened without interruption, her lined face grave. When he finished, she set the basket down with deliberate care. "Then you already know what this means," she said quietly. "That dog wasn't lost. She was taken, and if men are willing to bleed for her, it's because they know her worth." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, tension gathering. "Which makes her and the pup targets. Not just them," Martha added, her gaze sharp. "You too. You've tied yourself to her now. That means anyone hunting her will see you as standing in their way." Her words sank deep, but Caleb didn't flinch. He glanced toward the fire, where Liberty curled around Scout. "Then I stand in their way." Martha studied him a long moment, then nodded once, as though measuring the steel in his resolve. "Then we'd better be ready." That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat by the stove, rifle across his knees, the Denver file open on the table. Liberty lay nearby, her ears twitching with every creak of the cabin. Scout whimpered now and then, but his breathing held steady. Caleb's eyes traced the faded ink. Case numbers, handler names. One caught his attention, Sergeant Marcus Hale. The file noted his K-9 partner had gone missing during a transfer. Caleb frowned. Hale. He remembered the name. A handler from his own days overseas. Tough, loyal. Rumors said he'd retired broken, after losing his dog in a botched operation. Could Liberty be his? The thought churned in Caleb's chest. If so, then she wasn't just a survivor. She was the last tether to a man who had already lost everything. The radio crackled suddenly, jolting him. Sheriff Daniels' voice cut through the static. "Hunter, you awake? We've got chatter out of Billings. Word of men moving cargo through the mountains. Dogs, mostly. Trained. Matches the rumors Collins told you." Caleb pressed the receiver. "They're not rumors anymore. I've got proof." Daniels' tone shifted, harder. "Then keep her close. If they know she's alive, you can bet they'll come knocking again." Caleb set the receiver down, jaw tight. He turned toward Liberty, who had risen to her feet, her gaze locked on him as if she understood. He crouched, resting a hand on her head. She didn't pull away. "You were a partner once," he murmured. "Maybe you still are." The fire crackled, shadows dancing along the cabin walls. Outside, the storm had stilled into silence, but silence no longer comforted him. Somewhere beyond the ridge, men were moving. Men with maps, names, and orders. Caleb's hand tightened on Liberty's collar. He had uncovered who she was. The question now burned like ice in his chest. Who else knew, and how far would they go to claim her? The Montana sky bled into darkness early, swallowing the ridge in long shadows. The storm had broken, but the cold pressed in, sharper than ever. Caleb Hunter sat on the porch steps, breath clouding in the still air, rifle balanced across his knees. The snow underfoot gleamed blue in the starlight. Liberty padded out beside him, her fur bristling against the night chill. Scout stumbled after, his tiny paws sinking into the powder before Liberty nudged him back inside with a firm nudge of her muzzle. Caleb's lips twitched despite himself. For all her scars, for all the steel in her posture, she was still a mother first. But his chest was heavy. The Denver files, the tattoo, Raymond's venomous words, they had all pointed to one truth. Liberty wasn't just a stray. She was marked, trained, valuable, and danger wasn't finished with them yet. The wind carried faint sounds, branches creaking, snow shifting. Caleb's pulse quickened at every flicker of movement along the tree line. He leaned forward, scanning, but the forest gave nothing back. Inside, the firelight glowed through the window. Martha's voice carried softly as she tended Scout, who whimpered for another sip of warm goat's milk. She had insisted on staying the night, claiming the storm had left the ridge too treacherous to walk. Caleb hadn't argued. Truth was, he felt relief at her presence. He rose, brushing snow from his coat, and stepped back into the cabin. Liberty followed close, ears twitching. Martha looked up. "Anything?" "Quiet," Caleb said, hanging his rifle by the door. "Too quiet." She studied him, her gray eyes sharp. "Storms strip away noise. Makes it easier to hear what we don't want to." They ate in silence. Stew thick with venison and beans, the kind of food that clung to ribs against winter. Liberty watched from her place by the fire, her gaze never leaving Caleb. When the dishes were cleared, Martha settled near the stove. her hands wrapped around a tin cup of tea. She spoke without looking at him. "I heard more than just rumors in town." Caleb's head lifted. "There've been trucks on the back roads, covered loads, men nobody knows, moving in and out quick, and not the kind that come for hunting licenses." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Dogs," Martha nodded. "Not pets. Working stock. They're being pulled from kennels, training centers, even farms. Some vanish clean, no reports. Others end up for sale in places I don't care to name." Her voice thinned, edged with anger. "Folks like Raymond aren't lone wolves. They're links in a chain, and chains like that stretch farther than the mountains." The fire snapped, sending sparks up the chimney. Caleb rubbed the bridge of his nose. The truth was heavier than he'd let himself admit. This wasn't just one desperate man. It was an operation. Organized, ruthless. He looked at Liberty, curled around Scout. Her eyes were half closed, but her ears twitched at every sound, always alert. She had belonged to someone once. She had trained for something bigger. And now she was here, thrown into his care. "You're telling me I can't keep her safe," Caleb said quietly. Martha met his gaze. "I'm telling you, you'll have to fight harder than you've ever fought, and you won't be able to do it alone." The radio crackled suddenly, startling Scout awake. Caleb strode across the room, snatching the receiver. Sheriff Daniels' voice came low, steady, but tinged with unease. "Hunter, we've had a tip. Highway Patrol picked up chatter about men headed your way. 3 trucks, no plates, moving after dark. Could be nothing, but I don't like coincidences." Caleb's knuckles whitened around the receiver. "How long?" "An hour, maybe less. Batten down, Caleb. I'll rally what I can, but weather's slowed half my deputies." The line went dead. Caleb turned, every muscle tight. Martha had already risen, her face pale but resolute. Liberty stood braced, hackles high, growl simmering low. "They're coming," Caleb said. Martha's jaw firmed. "Then we prepare." The next hour blurred into motion. Caleb barred the windows, stacked furniture against the doors. Martha gathered supplies, extra lanterns, bandages, the old revolver Henry had left behind. Liberty paced the room in restless circles, Scout pressed beneath her chest. The silence outside thickened, pressing hard against the cabin walls. Even the wind seemed to hush, as if the forest itself held its breath. Caleb stood by the door, rifle ready. Martha took position near the back window, revolver trembling in her grip, but her stance unyielding. Then Liberty froze, head snapping toward the ridge. A growl built in her throat, deeper than before. Caleb's stomach dropped. He strained his ears, and there it was. Low, mechanical, tires crunching over ice, engines cutting through the stillness. Headlights flared briefly between the trees, slicing the dark before vanishing again. They had arrived. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger, Liberty's growl rumbling like thunder beside him. Scout whimpered softly, muffled against her chest. Martha whispered a prayer under her breath. And then, from outside, a voice rang sharp, carrying through the night air. "Hunter, step out with the dog and maybe you walk away breathing." The words cracked through the silence, leaving the cabin trembling in their wake. The night pressed in thick as iron. Snow fell in fine needles, whispering against the cabin walls. Beyond the tree line, engines idled low, their growl muffled by distance but heavy with intent. Caleb Hunter stood by the door, rifle steady, pulse hammering. Liberty bristled at his side, teeth bared, amber eyes burning into the dark. Scout whimpered faintly from beneath her chest. Martha Collins clutched her old revolver near the back window, her gray eyes wide but fierce. Then the voice cut the silence again, sharp and merciless. "Hunter, step out with the dog, and maybe you walk away breathing." Caleb exhaled, slow, deliberate. He'd heard those tones before, halfway across the world. Men who traded mercy for profit, men who saw loyalty as currency. He answered with steel in his voice, "If you want her, you'll have to come through me." The woods went still. Then headlights snapped on 3 beams slicing through the snow, glaring white against the cabin. Figures spilled from the trucks, shadows moving in formation. The crunch of boots on ice carried across the clearing. Liberty's growl deepened, vibrating through the floor. The first shot shattered the night. Glass sprayed from the window as a bullet ripped into the wall near Martha's shoulder. She ducked low, firing back with trembling hands. The crack of her revolver echoed like thunder across the ridge. Caleb yanked Liberty toward the hearth, pressing himself flat against the wall. He steadied his rifle, aimed through the jagged hole in the shutter. A silhouette moved between trees too slow. He squeezed the trigger. The figure dropped into the snow. Shouts erupted outside. Boots pounded, snow scattering under their charge. "Down!" Caleb barked. He shoved Martha to the floor just as another volley ripped through the cabin. Wood splintered. Sparks flew from the stove. Scout squealed, muffled against Liberty's chest. Caleb fired back, his shots precise, controlled. Years of soldiering roared back through his veins, every motion sharp, every breath measured. He struck another man as he advanced, sending him sprawling. But for every one that fell, more pressed forward. Martha crawled toward the table, dragging it onto its side for cover. Her revolver shook, but her jaw was set hard. "They'll burn the place down if they can't flush us out," she warned. Caleb knew she was right. He scanned the room quickly, searching. His gaze landed on the kerosene lantern stacked near the shelf. His mind snapped into focus. He grabbed one, lit the wick, and hurled it through the shattered window. Flames erupted as it smashed against the snowbank, forcing the advancing men to scatter. Their shouts split the night, momentary chaos buying precious seconds. "Move!" Caleb shouted. He dragged the heavy trunk across the floor, bracing it against the door. Liberty pressed close, never leaving Scout's side. Another crash came this time at the back. The thin wood wall buckled as shadows loomed. Martha fired again, the blast deafening in the small space. One figure reeled backward, but another surged forward, boot kicking the frame. Liberty lunged. Her body was a streak of muscle and fury, her jaws locking around the intruder's arm. His weapon clattered to the floor as her weight dragged him sideways. He screamed, twisting, but she held fast. Caleb swung the rifle stock into his jaw, the crack echoing. The man collapsed, Liberty standing over him, chest heaving, muzzle slick. Caleb grabbed her collar, pulling her back. His heart thundered. "Good girl," he whispered, voice rough. "Good girl." The firefight stretched, minutes bleeding like hours. Smoke curled from the stove, where bullets had torn through iron. The cabin reeked of gunpowder, sweat, blood, and then headlights swept wider across the clearing, brighter, closer. A siren wailed low, cutting through the gunfire. Sheriff Daniels' truck barreled into view, another cruiser sliding in behind it. Red and blue flashed against the snow, painting the night in harsh colors. The attackers faltered. Some dropped weapons, others fled into the trees. Daniels stormed forward, shotgun raised, his voice booming. "Drop it now! On the ground!" Deputies fanned out, tackling two of the men before they could run. Another raised his hands, face pale in the glare of the lights. The gunfire died. Silence returned, heavy and broken only by the groans of the wounded. Inside the cabin, Caleb sank to his knees, rifle limp in his grip. Liberty pressed against him, her body still taut, but her growl fading. Scout whimpered once, then nestled into her chest again. Martha exhaled shakily, lowering her revolver. Daniels burst through the door, scanning the wreckage, splintered wood, shattered glass, the floor stained dark. His eyes landed on Liberty and Scout, then on Caleb, his face lined with relief. "You held them," Daniels said, voice low. "Damn it, Hunter, you held them." Caleb didn't answer. His gaze stayed on Liberty, the firelight catching in her amber eyes. In them, he saw not just survival, but something sharper. Resolve. The rest blurred. Men dragged away in cuffs. Radios crackled. Martha patched Caleb's split knuckles with a strip of cloth. Scout slept at last, breathing steady, wrapped in the wool blanket. Dawn crept slow, gray light seeping into the ruined cabin. Daniels lingered at the door. "We'll take the prisoners into town. Word will spread. Might buy you some peace." Caleb only nodded. He knew better. Raymond's words echoed still. "You've got no idea what you've stepped into." When the last deputy's truck pulled away, silence returned. Caleb stood on the porch, rifle slung across his shoulder, Liberty at his side. Scout tumbled clumsily behind, his paws leaving small tracks in the fresh snow. The forest stretched quiet, untouched, as if nothing had happened. But Caleb's gut twisted. He could feel it. The story wasn't over. Liberty stiffened, ears snapping forward. A low growl built in her chest. Caleb followed her gaze. Across the ridge, half hidden by trees, a lone figure stood watching. Not Raymond, someone taller, broader. The man didn't move, didn't speak. He only raised a hand slowly, deliberately, as if marking them. Then he vanished into the trees. Caleb's breath misted in the cold. His grip tightened on the rifle. Beside him, Liberty pressed closer, Scout squeaking softly between them. The dawn was breaking. The battle was won. But the war? That question burned colder than the snow itself.